So, societies have a tendency to uphold, reinforce and reproduce stereotypes. This begs the question whether there is something going on at a higher or more general level to cause or enable this. It's unlikely that we're each individually bad people who proactively want to disempower others, isn't it? We have to take a certain amount of individual responsibility for how we communicate about others and whether this upholds or challenges stereotypes, of course, but it's likely not just that. Neither can we suggest that those in power or those in the media are forcing us to see things a certain way. That would entirely undermine our independence of thought. It makes more sense to think of what's going on as less direct cause and effect and more abstract. What we're dealing with here is ideology. Ideology is sets of ideas which give some account of the social world. Ideas which are usually selective and partial. Partial in both senses of the word, as in only showing part or parts of something, and partial in the sense of taking the view of one side where there are different views, for example in a debate. We could think of our pictures of Niger that we looked at in the last video as an illustration or microcosm of how ideology works. A microcosm is just a community, place or situation regarded as encapsulating in miniature the characteristics of something much larger. No doubt the photographers or journalists took a great many pictures of the situation and then they selected one over others. In some cases, they chose a picture that represented part of a broader situation, or possibly cropped the picture to do this. That is one sense of partial. Pictures 1 and 2 represent one broadly recognised view of developing countries, that it is necessary for more developed, more affluent countries to actively come in and save the passive people in the developing country. Pictures 3 and 4 represent a second, also recognised but less common view that people from developed countries should recognise that people in developing countries are already working on improving their situation and should support them in continuing to do so. Each broad view is a partial one in the second sense. Ideology is the same. It's selective about how it represents things. It represents things according to one particular view of the world. Consider the different political parties and opinions that exist in your own context. It is likely that the different parties or opinions say different things about how things are in your society or how they should be. Perhaps you have experienced discussions or debates with friends or family in which you and others are coming from quite different points of view. Ideology is probably at play there. It may sometimes feel in those discussions as if you are not really talking about politics at all, but about how the world should be in some natural, common sense way, which can make it all the more frustrating if two sides in a debate think that they are the side that is talking sense. This is a key characteristic of ideology. It presents one view of things as if it is natural. Representing something as natural by extension hides it, which makes the ideology more powerful or effective. This becomes more pertinent when we consider that ideologies are rarely equal. They usually vie for dominance, and there is usually one that is currently dominant, which usually equates with the political party currently in power or with the most seats in a parliament. Furthermore, there is usually a relationship between how reality is represented in an ideology and the relationships of power in the society or community in which it is used, as in, those in power will be represented more favourably or as naturally dominant. So where did the concept of ideology come from? Karl Marx is the person who is acknowledged for the original idea, and many others have written on it since then. It is useful to think about the development of theory as a conversation between different thinkers. In almost all cases, one person or a group of people come up with a particular way of conceptualizing or thinking about something, or at least they are the first to give a name to something and have that published, and thereafter others build on it, support it, or challenge it. This process of building, supporting, and challenging may go on for years, decades, centuries, as is the case with the concept of ideology. Karl Marx initially wrote on it in 1867. Thinkers are still debating and developing the idea today and will probably continue to do so for the foreseeable future. There is some bonus content in this week's folder which explains a bit more about exactly how Marx saw things and how others who came along later critiqued what he said. You don't have to read it, but you will find it interesting if you're finding the concept of ideology intriguing. In this video, I'm going to keep the subject matter lighter and try to illustrate to you visually how different schools of thought about ideology see things. I frequently use analogies in my teaching, and they will often involve images. My reasoning for doing this is twofold. Firstly, comparing something new to an item or process one is already familiar with will potentially aid in understanding the new thing. Secondly, we all learn differently, and there are a range of learning styles. Some of us learn more visually, and PowerPoint slides full of text will not suit people who learn visually, as well as those who learn linguistically or textually. Not everything works for everyone, so conversely, if engaging with these analogies seems confusing to you, which it might if you're more of a textual or linguistic learner, don't worry about it. I think the differences in the extent to which we as individuals have power to reproduce or challenge ideology can be illustrated with different approaches to drawing and colouring in. Yes, really. Often these things, at their most basic level at least, are really very straightforward. Firstly, colouring by numbers. This is a very deterministic approach to colouring in. The lines are in set places and which colour goes where is predetermined. So, unless you're feeling a bit rebellious and you simply ignore this or overrule it, you will produce what the person who designed the colouring book determined that you would produce, with no deviation. This image is therefore an analogy for a very fixed approach to ideology like Marx's, where each of us are not sufficiently conscious or critical of the structure to challenge it. It is not possible for an individual to have an effect on the structure and ideology unless their consciousness is raised, because there are countless other identical colour by number books out there with exactly the same lines and colour guidance for other individual colourers. Secondly, we have regular traditional colouring books. There is still a determined outline of a picture which colourers are expected to stay within. You can choose your own colours, so whilst there are norms of what you might be expected to put where, you might be more expected to colour grass green than purple, for example, you can choose your own colours, so there is more choice available to you than in colouring by numbers. Thirdly, we have guided drawing, where you are given instructions about how to draw something. The something may be the same as in the colouring by numbers and the colouring in contexts, but you're bringing your own style to the drawing. You're drawing it with your own strokes. So again, there is more choice available to you in this mode than in the other two we have discussed so far. Next, we'll consider drawing apps. When I was a child, a long time ago, the equivalent would have been a toy called Etch-a-Sketch. Google it for some retro children's toy education. With Etch-a-Sketch, you drew something by pressing lines into plastic and then pulled a lever across the screen. With a drawing app, you draw straight onto the screen and have the ability to erase or cancel the picture you've drawn. You can wipe the slate clean and start again. This approach is a good analogy for postmodern thinkers. They argue that agency can override structure, or in other words, that we have a significant amount of control over our individual identities. They would say we can choose who we are and how we portray ourselves. We can change this repeatedly, and we're totally empowered in doing so. Why not reflect on which of the drawing analogies fits best with your own experience of identity? What is your own personal tension between structure and agency? To what extent do things constrict the extent to which you can construct? See you in the next video.